The rain hammered against the windows of Tom's small apartment like angry fists. He glanced at the clock on the kitchen wall, 11:47 p.m. His 8-year-old son Jake had finally fallen asleep after complaining about the thunder for the past hour. Tom was about to head to bed himself when he heard it, a soft knocking at his door. He froze. Who would be knocking this late, especially in weather like this? Tom lived in a modest neighborhood where people mostly kept to themselves. He wasn't expecting anyone. The knocking came again, more urgent this time, followed by what sounded like a child's voice. Tom approached the door carefully and peered through the peephole. What he saw made his heart sink. A woman stood outside, soaked to the bone, her dark hair plastered to her face. She was holding the hand of a boy who looked about Jake's age. Both of them were shivering, their clothes completely drenched. Without hesitation, Tom unlocked the door and opened it. The woman looked up at him with desperate eyes, water dripping from her face. She was probably in her early 30s with kind features despite her obvious distress. "I'm so sorry to bother you this late," she said, her voice shaking from both cold and nervousness. "My car broke down about 2 blocks from here and my phone is dead. The storm is getting worse and my son—" She looked down at the boy beside her who was trying to be brave but was clearly scared and cold. "Please come in," Tom said immediately, stepping aside. "You're both freezing." The woman hesitated for a moment. "I don't want to impose. If you could just let me use your phone to call for help." "Nonsense," Tom interrupted gently. "It's nearly midnight and this storm isn't going anywhere. Come inside where it's warm." As they stepped into his living room, Tom quickly grabbed some clean towels from the linen closet. The woman and her son stood awkwardly by the door, creating small puddles on his hardwood floor. "Here," he said, handing them the towels. "I'm Tom, by the way." "Sarah," the woman replied gratefully, accepting the towel and immediately wrapping it around her son. "And this is my son, Marcus." The boy looked up at Tom with wide, curious eyes. Despite being cold and wet, he managed a small smile. "Thank you, mister," he said politely. Tom's heart warmed. The kid reminded him of Jake at that age. Polite, a little shy, but with that spark of resilience that children somehow possessed. "Let me get you both some dry clothes," Tom offered. "I have some old sweats that might fit you, Sarah, and I'm sure I can find something for Marcus. Jake's about the same size." Sarah's eyes welled up with tears, though Tom wasn't sure if it was from relief or embarrassment. "You're too kind. We just need to dry off and maybe use your phone." "The phone lines are down," Tom said, gesturing toward his landline. "Cell towers too, probably. This storm knocked out power to half the city earlier. We're lucky to still have electricity." As if the universe wanted to prove his point, the lights flickered ominously overhead. "Mom," Marcus whispered, tugging on Sarah's wet sleeve. "I'm really cold." That settled it for Tom. "Come on," he said, leading them down the hallway. "Let's get you warmed up first. Then we'll figure everything else out in the morning." He rummaged through his dresser and found an old college sweatshirt and some sweatpants for Sarah. From Jake's room, he quietly retrieved some pajamas and a warm hoodie for Marcus. When he returned to the living room, Sarah was looking around his modest home with an expression he couldn't quite read. The apartment wasn't much. A 2-bedroom place with furniture that had seen better days, but it was clean and filled with signs of a loving father-son relationship. Jake's drawings covered the refrigerator, and toys were neatly organized in a corner of the living room. "The bathroom's right down the hall," Tom said, handing them the clothes. "Take your time getting changed. I'll make some hot chocolate." While Sarah and Marcus were changing, Tom busied himself in the kitchen. He heated milk on the stove and added cocoa powder, sugar, and a dash of vanilla, the same way his mother used to make it for him when he was Jake's age after coming in from playing in the snow. The storm continued to rage outside, and Tom found himself wondering about this woman and her son. There was something about Sarah that intrigued him. Despite her obvious distress, she carried herself with a certain dignity. Her clothes, though now soaked, looked expensive. Her son was remarkably well behaved for a child who had just been through such an ordeal. But what struck him most was the way she had looked at his apartment, not with judgment, but with something that looked almost like longing, as if she was seeing something she missed. When they emerged from the bathroom, both looking much more comfortable in the borrowed clothes, Tom handed them steaming mugs of hot chocolate. "This is delicious," Marcus said after taking a sip, his eyes lighting up for the first time since they'd arrived. Sarah wrapped her hands around the mug, savoring the warmth. You've been incredibly kind, Tom. I can't thank you enough. Don't mention it, Tom replied, settling into his worn armchair while Sarah and Marcus sat on the couch. So what brings you to this neighborhood? If you don't mind me asking. Sarah hesitated, choosing her words carefully. We were visiting someone nearby. When we were leaving, the car just died. I'm not very good with mechanical things. Tom nodded understandingly. These old cars can be unpredictable. I'll take a look at it in the morning if you'd like. I'm pretty handy with engines. You don't have to do that, Sarah protested. I want to help, Tom said simply. Besides, Jake would love to meet Marcus when he wakes up. He doesn't get to hang out with kids his age very often. As if summoned by the mention of his name, Jake appeared in the doorway, rubbing his sleepy eyes. His hair was sticking up in all directions and he was clutching his favorite stuffed dinosaur. Dad? I heard voices, he said, then noticed the strangers on their couch. Instead of being shy, Jake's face brightened with curiosity. Jake, buddy, come meet our guests, Tom said warmly. This is Sarah and Marcus. They're staying with us tonight because of the storm. Jake padded over in his dinosaur pajamas and waved at Marcus. Cool, do you like dinosaurs? This is Rex, he said, holding up his stuffed toy. Marcus grinned, and suddenly he looked like any other 8-year-old boy instead of someone who had just been through a frightening experience. I love dinosaurs. My favorite is the Triceratops, and that's awesome. Do you want to see my dinosaur books? Before Sarah could intervene, the two boys were deep in conversation about prehistoric creatures. She watched with a mixture of amazement and something that looked like sadness. Tom noticed her expression. Everything okay? Sarah smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. Marcus doesn't usually warm up to people so quickly. He's been through a lot lately. Tom wanted to ask what she meant, but something in her tone told him not to push. Instead, he simply said, Jake's the same way. It's nice to see them connecting. As the boys chatted excitedly about dinosaurs, Tom found himself studying Sarah more carefully. Despite wearing his old college clothes, she possessed an elegant grace that seemed natural rather than practiced. The way she spoke, her posture, even how she held her mug. Everything suggested she was accustomed to a very different life than what she was experiencing in his humble apartment. But there was also something vulnerable about her, something that made Tom want to protect her and her son from whatever storm they were really running from, because he was beginning to suspect it wasn't just the weather that had brought them to his door on this dark, rainy night. The next morning, Tom woke up to the sound of laughter coming from the kitchen. For a moment, he was confused. Jake was usually quiet in the mornings, preferring to eat his cereal while watching cartoons. But as he padded down the hallway in his slippers, he found a scene that warmed his heart. Sarah was at the stove, making pancakes from scratch, while Jake and Marcus sat at the small kitchen table, giggling over something Marcus had drawn on a napkin. The smell of coffee and vanilla filled the air, and sunlight streamed through the windows, making the whole kitchen feel brighter and more alive than it had in months. Good morning, Sarah said, turning to smile at him. She looked completely different in the morning light. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore the same borrowed clothes from the night before. But there was something peaceful about her expression that hadn't been there when she'd first arrived. Morning, Dad, Jake called out cheerfully. Sarah makes the best pancakes ever. She puts cinnamon in them. Tom accepted a cup of coffee from Sarah, noticing how naturally she moved around his kitchen, as if she'd been doing it for years instead of just one morning. You didn't have to do all this, he said. You're the guest here. It's the least I can do after your kindness last night, Sarah replied, flipping a perfectly golden pancake. Besides, I love cooking. I don't get to do it very often anymore. There was something wistful in her voice that made Tom curious, but before he could ask, Marcus piped up. Mom used to cook all the time when I was little, but now we mostly eat at restaurants or have someone else cook for us. Sarah's face tightened almost imperceptibly, and she quickly changed the subject. Tom, you mentioned you might look at my car this morning. Of course, Tom said, noting how she'd smoothly redirected the conversation away from her personal life. Let me grab some tools after breakfast. The four of them sat around the small table, and Tom marveled at how normal it felt. Jake was animated in a way Tom hadn't seen in a long time, asking Marcus about his school, his favorite games, and whether he had any pets. Marcus, in turn, seemed to hang on Jake's every word as his new friend described their neighborhood, his school, and his collection of toy dinosaurs. Do you have a mom? Marcus asked innocently, and Tom nearly choked on his coffee. Jake's expression grew serious. She went to heaven when I was 5, he said matter-of-factly. But Dad takes really good care of me. He makes me lunch every day and helps with my homework, and we have movie nights on Fridays. Sarah's eyes met Tom's across the table, filled with compassion and understanding. Your dad sounds wonderful, she told Jake softly. He is, Jake agreed, beaming at Tom. What about your dad, Marcus? Is he at work? This time it was Marcus who grew quiet, and Sarah quickly intervened. Marcus's father isn't in the picture, she said gently but firmly. It's just the two of us. Tom recognized the tone. It was the same one he used when well-meaning strangers asked about Jake's mother. Some subjects were too complicated and painful to explain to curious 8-year-olds. After breakfast, Tom and Marcus walked the 2 blocks to where Sarah's car had broken down. It was a sleek black sedan that looked expensive and well-maintained, which only added to the mystery surrounding Sarah. This wasn't the kind of car someone drove if they were struggling financially. What do you think is wrong with it? Marcus asked as Tom popped the hood. Let's see, Tom murmured, examining the engine. After a few minutes of checking connections and looking at various components, he found the problem. Looks like your alternator belt snapped. That's why it died and won't start again. Can you fix it? Marcus asked hopefully. Tom smiled. I think so, but I'll need to get a replacement belt from the auto parts store. They won't be open until Monday, though. When they returned to the apartment, Sarah was washing the breakfast dishes. She turned anxiously as they entered. How bad is it? Actually, it's a pretty simple fix, Tom explained. Just need a new alternator belt. The parts store will be open Monday morning, and I can have you back on the road by afternoon. Sarah's face fell. Monday, but that's 2 more days. You're welcome to stay here, Tom said quickly. I mean, if you don't mind the accommodations. The couch pulls out into a bed, and Jake would love to have Marcus around for the weekend. Yeah, Jake exclaimed, having overheard. We could show Marcus the park and the comic book store, and maybe Dad could take us to get ice cream. Marcus looked at his mother with pleading eyes. Can we, Mom, please? Sarah looked conflicted, as if staying was both what she wanted and what she feared most. I couldn't impose on your family for an entire weekend. We should find a hotel. On a weekend in this weather after last night's storm? Tom shook his head. Everything's probably booked. Besides, the boys are already planning their weekend adventure. It would be a shame to disappoint them. As if to prove his point, Marcus and Jake had already started discussing all the things they wanted to do together. Their excitement was infectious, and Tom could see Sarah wavering. I insist, Tom added gently. It's been a long time since Jake's had a friend over. You'd actually be doing us a favor. Finally, Sarah nodded, though she still looked uncertain. Okay, but I'm paying for groceries and I'm cooking dinner tonight. Deal, Tom agreed, though he had no intention of letting her pay for anything. The rest of Saturday passed like a dream. Tom took the boys to the local park, where Marcus proved to be fearless on the playground equipment and surprisingly good at basketball despite his smaller size. Sarah walked beside Tom, occasionally calling out encouragement to the boys, but mostly just watching Marcus play with the kind of intense focus that suggested she didn't see him have fun very often. He's a great kid, Tom commented as they watched Marcus show Jake how to do a proper layup. He is, Sarah agreed, her voice thick with emotion. Sometimes I worry that he's too serious for his age. It's wonderful to see him just being a kid. What does he want to be when he grows up? Tom asked. Sarah smiled. A teacher. He says he wants to help other kids learn things. Last month he asked if he could volunteer at a literacy program for younger children. Tom was impressed. That's pretty mature thinking for an 8-year-old. Maybe too mature, Sarah said quietly. Sometimes I wonder if I've asked too much of him. Expected him to grow up too fast. There was pain in her voice, and Tom found himself wanting to comfort her. To tell her that whatever she was going through, whatever decisions she was questioning, Marcus was clearly a happy, well-adjusted kid who adored his mother, but before he could find the right words, Marcus came running over. Mom, Tom, watch me do this trick Jake taught me. They spent the afternoon playing at the park, then stopped by the small grocery store where Sarah insisted on buying ingredients for dinner despite Tom's protests. He noticed she didn't look at prices, just picked out high-quality ingredients without hesitation. She also bought Jake a new box of his favorite cereal and Marcus a small toy dinosaur, brushing off Tom's attempts to reimburse her. That evening, Sarah prepared a dinner that was restaurant quality, perfectly seasoned salmon, roasted vegetables, and homemade dinner rolls. Tom and Jake sat at the table in amazement as she worked, moving around the kitchen with the confidence of someone who had serious culinary training. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" Tom asked as they ate. Sarah hesitated, then said, "I took some classes a few years ago. I thought it would be a useful skill." It was another non-answer, but Tom was beginning to understand that Sarah was carefully guarding her privacy. He didn't push, even though his curiosity was growing stronger by the hour. After dinner, they settled in the living room to watch a movie. The boys wanted to watch an adventure film, and as the credits rolled, both Marcus and Jake had fallen asleep on the floor, surrounded by pillows and blankets. Tom and Sarah sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching their sleeping sons. The apartment felt full in a way it hadn't since his wife died 3 years ago. "Thank you," Sarah said quietly, "for all of this. You've given Marcus something I haven't been able to give him in a long time." "What's that?" Tom asked. Sarah smiled sadly. "A normal weekend. The chance to just be a kid with a friend, to play and laugh without worrying about anything else." Tom wanted to ask what Marcus usually had to worry about, what kind of life they lived that made a simple weekend in his modest apartment feel like such a gift. But the vulnerable look in Sarah's eyes stopped him. Instead, he said, "Jake's been happier this weekend than I've seen him in months. You and Marcus have given us something special too." As they carried the sleeping boys to their respective beds, Tom couldn't help but notice how perfectly Sarah seemed to fit into their little family, how right it felt to have her there. But he also couldn't shake the feeling that she was keeping a significant secret, and that when Monday came and her car was fixed, both she and Marcus might disappear from their lives as suddenly as they had arrived. Sunday morning brought unexpected complications. Tom woke up to find Sarah pacing in the kitchen, her phone pressed to her ear. She was speaking in hushed, urgent tones, and from what he could overhear, it didn't sound like a casual conversation. "I understand the urgency, David, but I told you I need until Wednesday," she was saying, her voice tight with stress. "No, I can't be there tomorrow." Something unexpected came up. She noticed Tom standing in the doorway and quickly moved toward the living room, lowering her voice even further. Tom tried not to eavesdrop, but he caught fragments. "Board meeting. Acquisition. Millions at stake." When she returned to the kitchen 15 minutes later, her face was pale and drawn. The peaceful woman who had made pancakes the day before was gone, replaced by someone who looked like she was carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. "Everything okay?" Tom asked gently, pouring her a cup of coffee. Sarah accepted it gratefully, her hands shaking slightly. "Just some work issues. Nothing that can't wait." But Tom could see it was far from nothing. Whatever was happening in her professional life was clearly causing her significant stress. He wanted to help, but he also sensed that pushing for information would only make her more guarded. The boys emerged from Jake's room around 9, already deep in conversation about their plans for the day. Marcus had slept on an air mattress in Jake's room, and both boys seemed to think this was the greatest adventure ever. "Can we go to the comic book store today?" Jake asked excitedly. "I want to show Marcus the new Superman comics, and maybe we could get hot dogs from that cart you told me about," Marcus added hopefully. Tom looked at Sarah, who was staring into her coffee cup with a distracted expression. "Sarah, does that sound okay to you?" She snapped back to attention. "Oh yes, of course. Whatever you boys want to do." But as they walked through the neighborhood later that morning, Tom noticed that Sarah kept checking her phone. She received several calls that she answered with increasingly tense conversations, always stepping away from the boys so they wouldn't hear. At the comic book store, while Jake and Marcus marveled over the latest superhero adventures, Tom found himself watching Sarah browse through the graphic novels. She picked up a copy of a business biography, then a cookbook, then a children's book about dinosaurs. Her choices seemed random, as if she was trying to distract herself from whatever crisis was unfolding in her other life. "Find anything interesting?" Tom asked, approaching her. Sarah startled, quickly putting the book back on the shelf. "Oh, just looking. You have a wonderful neighborhood, Tom. Very peaceful." There was something wistful in the way she said it, as if peace was something foreign to her usual existence. They bought hot dogs from a street vendor for lunch, and Tom noticed that Marcus ate with the enthusiasm of a kid who didn't often get to enjoy simple street food. When mustard dripped down his chin, he giggled instead of worrying about his appearance. And Sarah watched him with a mixture of joy and sadness that Tom was beginning to recognize. That afternoon, while the boys played video games in Jake's room, Tom found Sarah standing at the living room window, staring out at the quiet street. Her phone rang again, and this time her conversation was brief and sharp. "No, Robert. I said Wednesday, and I meant Wednesday. If the Yamamoto group can't wait 2 more days, then maybe this isn't the right partnership for us." She hung up and immediately noticed Tom watching her with concern. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "I know this is supposed to be a relaxing weekend, and here I am bringing work drama into your home. Want to talk about it?" Tom offered, sitting on the couch and patting the cushion next to him. Sarah hesitated, then sat down with a heavy sigh. "It's complicated. I'm supposed to be somewhere tomorrow for a very important business meeting, but you don't want to leave Marcus," Tom finished. "It's more than that," Sarah admitted. "This weekend, watching Marcus just be a normal kid, seeing him make a friend, laughing without worrying about anything else. I realize how much I've been depriving him of this kind of life." Tom frowned. "What do you mean?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment, choosing her words carefully. "Marcus and I live a very structured, very adult life. He goes to a private school where he's expected to excel at everything. Our social events are business functions where he has to dress up and be polite to important people. Even our vacations are planned around networking opportunities. That sounds exhausting," Tom said gently. "It is," Sarah agreed, her voice breaking slightly. "And I've been telling myself it was all for him, to give him opportunities and security. But watching him this weekend, I realize I've been robbing him of his childhood." Tom reached over and squeezed her hand. "It's not too late to change things." Sarah's phone buzzed again, but for the first time all day she ignored it. "What if it is? What if I've built a life that's too big, too complicated to step back from?" Before Tom could answer, Marcus appeared in the living room doorway. "Mom, are you sad?" Sarah quickly wiped her eyes and forced a smile. "No, sweetheart. Just tired." Marcus climbed onto the couch next to her. "Jake says when his dad is sad, they have ice cream for dinner and watch funny movies. Maybe we could try that?" Tom's heart melted at the sweet suggestion, but he also noticed how perceptive Marcus was to his mother's emotions. This was a kid who was used to taking care of the adults in his life. "You know what?" Sarah said, pulling Marcus into a hug. "That sounds perfect." That evening, they did indeed have ice cream for dinner. 3 different flavors that they mixed together in ridiculous combinations, while watching a comedy movie that had all of them laughing until their sides hurt. For a few hours, Sarah's phone stayed silent, and the stress lines around her eyes softened. Later, after the boys had gone to bed, Sarah and Tom sat on the front porch steps, enjoying the cool evening air. The neighborhood was quiet except for the distant sounds of families settling in for the night. "I haven't felt this relaxed in years," Sarah confessed. "There's something about your life here that's so genuine, real." "What's your life usually like?" Tom asked carefully. Sarah was quiet for so long that Tom thought she wouldn't answer. Finally, she said, "Busy, very, very busy. And sometimes I forget why I'm doing it all. For Marcus, I tell myself that. But lately, I'm not so sure." She turned to look at Tom. "You're a good father, you know that? Jake adores you, and he's such a happy, confident kid." "Some days I feel like I'm failing him," Tom admitted. "Like I can't give him everything he needs." "You're giving him the most important thing," Sarah said firmly. "Your time, your attention, your love. Trust me, that's worth more than anything money can buy." There was pain in her voice, and Tom sensed she was speaking from experience. "Sarah," he said quietly, "I know we just met, but if you ever need someone to talk to, someone who understands what it's like to raise a kid on your own, I'm here." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "You barely know me." "I know enough," Tom said. "I know you're a devoted mother who would do anything for her son. I know you're kind and generous and stronger than you think. And I know that whatever you're going through, you don't have to go through it alone." For a moment, Tom thought Sarah might open up, might tell him whatever secret she was carrying. But then her phone rang again, the sound cutting through the peaceful evening like a knife. This time she didn't answer it. Instead, she turned it off completely and looked at Tom with determination in her eyes. "Tomorrow, when you fix my car," she said, "would it be okay if Marcus and I stayed one more day? I think we both need a little more of this normal life before we go back to reality." Tom smiled. "Of course. Stay as long as you need." But as they headed inside, Tom couldn't shake the feeling that Sarah's reality was about to catch up with her whether she was ready or not. And when it did, he wondered if he would ever see her and Marcus again. The thought of losing them after just 3 days filled him with an unexpected ache. Somehow, this mysterious woman and her remarkable son had already become more important to him than he'd thought possible. Monday morning arrived with an urgency that none of them were ready for. Tom was fixing Sarah's car in the small parking area behind their building when 3 black SUVs pulled up to the curb. He looked up from under the hood, wiping his hands on an old rag, and watched as several people in expensive suits climbed out of the vehicles. "Sarah Mitchell," called a woman with sharp features and an even sharper voice. "We need to talk now." Tom's stomach dropped. Sarah Mitchell. He'd never even known her last name. But something about the way these people carried themselves, the obvious wealth displayed in their clothing and vehicles, made him realize he'd been harboring someone far more important than he'd imagined. Sarah appeared at his side, having clearly seen the SUVs arrive from the apartment window. Her face had gone completely white, and she looked smaller somehow, as if she was trying to make herself invisible. "David," she said to a distinguished man in his 50s who was approaching them with determined strides. "I told you I needed until Wednesday." "The Yamamoto deal is falling apart, Sarah," David replied, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to being obeyed. "The board is in emergency session. The stock price dropped 12% in the last 2 days because rumors are spreading that our CEO has disappeared." Tom felt the world tilt on its axis. Sarah was a CEO? He looked at her with new eyes, suddenly understanding the expensive clothes, the way she moved with unconscious authority, the business calls, Marcus's comments about eating at restaurants and having other people cook for them. "I haven't disappeared," Sarah said firmly, though Tom could hear the uncertainty in her voice. "I'm taking some personal time." "Personal time?" The sharp-voiced woman laughed harshly. "Sarah, you're the CEO of a Fortune 500 company. You don't get to take personal time in the middle of the biggest acquisition in our company's history." Tom stood frozen, still holding the wrench he'd been using on Sarah's alternator. This woman, who had made pancakes in his kitchen and played with his son in the park, was apparently one of the most powerful business people in the country. The magnitude of her secret hit him like a physical blow. "Mom?" Marcus appeared at the apartment building's entrance with Jake close behind. Both boys looked confused and worried by the crowd of serious adults. Sarah immediately moved toward her son, her protective instincts overriding everything else. "Marcus, go back inside with Jake for a few minutes, okay? Mommy needs to handle some work business." But Marcus had already noticed the SUVs, the suited figures, the tension in his mother's posture. His expression grew resigned, as if he'd seen this scene play out many times before. "Are we leaving now?" he asked quietly. The simple question broke Tom's heart. This 8-year-old kid was so accustomed to his mother's business world intruding on their personal life that he wasn't even surprised. "Not yet," Sarah said, kneeling down to his level. "Go inside, sweetheart. I'll be up in a few minutes." After the boys reluctantly went back into the building, David turned his attention to Tom for the first time. "And you are?" "Tom Henderson," Tom replied, fighting to keep his voice steady. "A friend." The sharp-voiced woman, who Tom now realized was probably some kind of executive assistant or board member, looked him up and down dismissively. "Sarah, we don't have time for whatever this is. The helicopter is waiting to take you back to the city. You need to be in the boardroom in 2 hours. "Helicopter," Tom repeated faintly. Sarah's face flushed with embarrassment and something that looked like shame. "Tom, I should have told you." "Told me what exactly?" Tom asked, though he was beginning to piece it together. "That you're not just some woman whose car broke down? That you're apparently rich enough to have helicopters waiting for you?" "Sarah owns Mitchell Industries," David explained impatiently, as if Tom should have known this already. 60,000 employees worldwide. Last year's revenue was $18 billion. She's been missing from the office for 4 days, and it's causing a company-wide crisis. Tom felt like he'd been punched in the gut. $18 billion. While he was worried about paying Jake's school fees and whether he could afford new sneakers for his growing son, Sarah was apparently worth more money than he could even comprehend. "I never lied to you," Sarah said desperately, reaching for Tom's arm. He stepped back, and the hurt that flashed across her face was unmistakable. "You never told me the truth either," Tom replied quietly. When you said Marcus doesn't usually warm up to people quickly because he's been through a lot lately, what did you mean? That it's hard for him to make friends when his mom is a billionaire? It's not like that, Sarah protested. Yes, I have money, but that doesn't change who I am, who Marcus is, doesn't it? Tom asked, gesturing toward the SUVs, the waiting helicopter they could now hear approaching in the distance. Look around, Sarah, this is your real life. What happened this weekend? That was just you playing pretend. The helicopter landed in the street, causing neighbors to come out of their apartments and stare. The rotor wash scattered debris and made conversation nearly impossible. David had to shout to be heard over the noise. Sarah, we're out of time. The Yamamoto executives are threatening to walk away from the deal. Tom watched Sarah's face cycle through a dozen different emotions. He could see her torn between two worlds, the corporate empire that demanded her attention and the simple life she'd tasted over the weekend. What's going to happen to Marcus? Tom found himself asking, raising his voice over the helicopter noise. What do you mean? Sarah shouted back. When you go back to your $18 billion company and your board meetings and your acquisitions, Tom called out. What happens to the little boy who just wants to play with dinosaurs and eat pancakes? Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but before she could answer, Marcus came running out of the building again with Jake trailing behind him. The 8-year-old took one look at the helicopter, the serious adults, his mother's distressed face, and his small shoulders sagged in defeat. The car's fixed, isn't it? Marcus said, having to yell over the rotor noise. It wasn't really a question. Sarah knelt down and pulled him into a fierce hug. Marcus, I'm sorry. There's an emergency at work and they need me right away. I know, Marcus said with the resignation of a child who'd had many adventures cut short by business emergencies. I understand. But Tom could see that he didn't understand, not really. How could an 8-year-old understand why his mother's work was more important than the first real friendship he'd made in years? Jake stepped forward, confused and upset. Are you leaving right now? But we were going to build that fort today, and Marcus was going to teach me how to draw dragons. The innocent disappointment in Jake's voice seemed to hit Sarah harder than all of David's corporate urgency. She looked at Tom with eyes full of anguish, as if she was drowning and he was the only one who could save her. I have to go, she said, and Tom wasn't sure if she was talking to him or trying to convince herself. This deal, it affects thousands of jobs. I can't just walk away from that responsibility. What about your responsibility to your son? Tom asked quietly, but his words were lost in the helicopter noise. David was already ushering Sarah toward the waiting aircraft. We'll send someone back for your luggage, he called over his shoulder to Marcus. Pack quickly. Wait, Tom said, finding his voice again. Marcus can stay here until Sarah gets her business sorted out. If she wants him to. Everyone turned to stare at him. The suggestion was crazy. He barely knew these people, and yet he was offering to take care of the child of a billionaire CEO during a corporate crisis. Sarah's face lit up with hope, then immediately clouded with doubt. Tom, I couldn't ask you to do that. You don't understand the complications. If something happened to Marcus while he was in your care, the liability alone. I don't care about liability, Tom said firmly. I care about Marcus. Look at him, Sarah. Really look at him. Marcus was standing perfectly still, watching the adults make decisions about his life. His small face was a mask of careful composure, but Tom could see the fear and sadness in his eyes. This was a child who had learned not to express his own needs because the adult world was always more important. He doesn't want to go back to that life, Tom continued. Not yet. He wants to stay here and build forts with Jake and eat pancakes and just be 8 years old for a little while longer. Is that true, sweetheart? Sarah asked, kneeling down to Marcus's level again. Would you rather stay here with Tom and Jake while Mommy handles this work emergency? Marcus nodded eagerly, his careful composure finally cracking. Can I, Mom, please? I promise I'll be good, and I won't be any trouble. The fact that he felt he had to promise to be good broke Tom's heart all over again. Sarah looked torn between relief and terror. Tom, you don't understand what you're offering. If the media finds out where Marcus is, if business rivals try to use him as leverage if anything goes wrong, then we'll deal with it, Tom said simply. Together. David was growing increasingly impatient. Sarah, we need to go now. The board is waiting. Sarah stood up slowly, her decision clearly tearing her apart. She looked at Marcus, then at Tom, then at the helicopter that represented everything she'd built her life around. Okay, she said finally. Marcus can stay. but just for a few days until I can sort this mess out." She hugged Marcus tightly, whispering promises in his ear that Tom couldn't hear over the noise. Then she turned to Tom, and for a moment all the corporate executive facade fell away, leaving just a scared mother who was trying to do the right thing. "His bedtime is 8:30, she said quickly. "He's allergic to shellfish. He likes to sleep with a nightlight. If he has nightmares, just sit with him for a few minutes and he'll be fine. His emergency contact information is in my phone, but I'll text you all the important numbers. And Tom," she grabbed his hands desperately, "if this turns out to be a mistake, if I'm wrong to leave him here—" "You're not wrong," Tom assured her. "Marcus will be safe and happy, I promise." Sarah nodded, tears streaming down her face, and allowed David to help her into the helicopter. As it lifted off, she pressed her face against the window, watching her son grow smaller below. Marcus waved until the helicopter disappeared from sight, then turned to Tom with a brave smile that wobbled only slightly around the edges. "So," he said, trying to sound casual, "what should we do now?" Tom put his arm around both boys' shoulders and started walking back toward the apartment building. "Well, I believe someone mentioned something about building a fort and learning to draw dragons." As they climbed the stairs to the apartment, Tom's mind was reeling with the enormity of what had just happened. He was now responsible for the son of one of the most powerful women in the country, and he had no idea what he was getting himself into. But when he looked down at Marcus, who was already chattering excitedly to Jake about their fort-building plans, Tom knew he'd made the right choice. Whatever complications Sarah's wealth and position might bring into their lives, Marcus was still just a little boy who needed stability, friendship, and the chance to be a kid. The question that worried Tom most wasn't whether he could take care of Marcus, but whether Sarah would be able to find her way back to them through the maze of corporate demands and billion-dollar responsibilities that seemed to define her world. As they settled back into the apartment, Tom couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of a much larger story, one that would test not only his growing feelings for Sarah, but his ability to protect the two children who were quickly becoming the most important people in his life. The first sign that Tom had underestimated the situation came Tuesday morning when he found a man in a black suit sitting in a car across from his apartment building. The man made no attempt to hide his presence, simply sitting there with professional alertness, watching everyone who came and went. Tom's stomach knotted with worry. He'd agreed to watch Marcus, but he hadn't fully considered what it meant to be responsible for the child of someone with that level of wealth and public profile. As he walked Jake and Marcus to school, he noticed another car following them at a discreet distance. "Are those men following us?" Marcus asked quietly, his 8-year-old intuition picking up on the tension. Tom debated lying, then decided Marcus deserved honesty. "I think they might be security guards your mom arranged to keep you safe." Marcus nodded matter-of-factly, as if having security details was a normal part of life. For him, Tom realized, it probably was. At Jake's school, the principal, Mrs. Rodriguez, approached Tom with a concerned expression. "Mr. Henderson, we've had several calls this morning asking about Jake and his house guest. I've told everyone that we don't discuss our students' personal lives, but I wanted you to be aware." Tom's heart sank. "What kind of calls?" "Reporters mostly. Somehow word has gotten out that Marcus Mitchell is staying with you." Mrs. Rodriguez lowered her voice. "Tom, I don't know what situation you've gotten yourself into, but Mitchell Industries is major news right now. Their stock has been volatile all week, and there are rumors about their CEO having some kind of breakdown." The word breakdown hit Tom like a slap. Sarah hadn't seemed unstable to him, just conflicted and overwhelmed. But he was beginning to understand that in the corporate world, any deviation from expected behavior could be interpreted as weakness or instability. "Marcus is just a little boy," Tom said firmly. "Whatever's happening with his mother's business, he shouldn't be dragged into it." Mrs. Rodriguez nodded sympathetically. "I agree completely. But Tom, you need to be prepared. This kind of attention, it can get overwhelming quickly." She wasn't wrong. By lunchtime, there were 3 news vans parked outside Tom's apartment building. His phone had been ringing constantly with calls from reporters, financial journalists, and people claiming to represent various business interests. He'd stopped answering unknown numbers altogether. Marcus seemed to take it all in stride. But Tom noticed the boy checking his phone frequently, waiting for calls or texts from his mother that didn't come. Has she called you? Tom asked gently as they ate grilled cheese sandwiches for lunch. Marcus shook his head. She's probably in meetings all day. When there's a big business crisis, sometimes she doesn't call for days. The casual way Marcus said it broke Tom's heart. What kind of life had this kid been living where going days without talking to his mother during a crisis was normal? That afternoon, Tom's quiet life exploded into chaos. A woman with perfectly styled hair and a camera crew appeared at his door, somehow having bypassed building security. "Mr. Henderson," she called through the door. "I'm Rebecca Chen from Financial News Network. Can you tell us about your relationship with Sarah Mitchell? How long have you been romantically involved?" "Romantically involved?" Tom repeated, stunned. He opened the door just wide enough to speak through the chain lock. "We're not romantically involved. She's a friend who needed help. Sources tell us that the Mitchell Industries CEO has been staying at your apartment for several days," Rebecca continued, her tone suggesting she didn't believe his denial. "Can you comment on how this relationship might be affecting her business decisions?" Tom closed the door without answering, his mind spinning. Somehow the simple story of helping a stranded woman had been twisted into something completely different. He called Sarah's number, but it went straight to voicemail. The boys were playing video games in Jake's room, blissfully unaware of the media circus building outside. Tom envied their innocence even as he worried about how to protect them from it. His phone rang, displaying a number he didn't recognize. Against his better judgment, he answered. "Tom Henderson?" The voice was crisp, professional, and vaguely threatening. "Yes, my name is Jonathan Pierce. I represent certain interests that are concerned about the current instability at Mitchell Industries. We understand you have influence with Ms. Mitchell." "I don't have any influence with anyone," Tom said firmly. "And I'm not interested in whatever you're selling." "Mr. Henderson, you may not realize the position you're in. Sarah Mitchell's emotional state is affecting a company worth billions of dollars. The acquisition she's jeopardizing could impact thousands of jobs, not to mention the investments of major pension funds and retirement accounts." Tom felt a chill run down his spine. "What are you suggesting?" "Simply that you encourage Ms. Mitchell to prioritize her professional responsibilities. Convince her to complete the Yamamoto acquisition and restore stability to her company. There would, of course, be compensation for your assistance." "Are you trying to bribe me?" Tom asked, incredulous. "I'm offering you an opportunity to do the right thing for a lot of people while being fairly compensated for your time." Tom hung up without another word, but the call left him shaken. These people, whoever they were, somehow thought he had the power to influence Sarah's business decisions. The weight of that responsibility, combined with his concern for Marcus, was becoming overwhelming. That evening, as Tom was making dinner while the boys worked on homework at the kitchen table, his doorbell rang. He looked through the peephole and saw a woman in her 60s, elegantly dressed, standing alone in the hallway. "Mr. Henderson?" she said when he opened the door. "My name is Eleanor Mitchell. I'm Marcus's grandmother." Tom's eyes widened. He'd heard Marcus mention his grandmother a few times, but he'd assumed she lived far away. "May I come in?" Eleanor asked. "I'd like to meet the man who's been taking care of my grandson." Eleanor Mitchell was nothing like Tom had expected, where he'd imagined someone as corporate and intimidating as the people who'd taken Sarah away. Marcus's grandmother was warm and approachable, with kind eyes that reminded him of her grandson. Grandma Eleanor. Marcus shouted with delight when he saw her, abandoning his homework to run into her arms. "Hello, sweetheart," she said, hugging him tightly. "I've missed you." "Are you here to take me home?" Marcus asked, and Tom was surprised to hear disappointment in the boy's voice. "That depends," Eleanor said, looking meaningfully at Tom. "May we talk privately for a few minutes?" Tom asked Jake to keep Marcus company in his room, then sat across from Eleanor at the kitchen table. "Sarah called me this morning," Eleanor began. "She's beside herself with worry about leaving Marcus, but she's also terrified that her business responsibilities are spiraling out of control." "How is she?" Tom asked, realizing how much he'd been worried about Sarah despite his anger over her deception. "Honestly, she's a mess. She's been working 18-hour days trying to salvage this acquisition while constantly calling to check if Marcus is okay. The board is losing confidence in her judgment, and there are whispers about replacing her as CEO. Tom felt a stab of guilt. Had his willingness to care for Marcus actually made Sarah's situation worse by enabling her to avoid her responsibilities? "Here's what you need to understand about my daughter-in-law," Eleanor continued. Sarah built Mitchell Industries from almost nothing after my son died. She's brilliant and driven, but she's also been trying to be both mother and father to Marcus while running a massive company. She's been stretched too thin for years. Then why doesn't she step back? Delegate more? Eleanor smiled sadly. Because she's terrified that if she shows any weakness, any prioritization of family over business, the board will use it as an excuse to push her out. It's a male-dominated industry, Tom. Women CEOs are held to impossible standards. Tom began to understand the impossible position Sarah was in. If she'd brought Marcus with her to the business meetings, she'd be criticized for being unprofessional. If she left him behind, she was a neglectful mother. If she tried to balance both, she was seen as unfocused and unstable. What does she want me to do? Tom asked. She wants to know if you'd be willing to keep Marcus for another week while she tries to resolve the crisis. But Tom, Eleanor leaned forward intently, I need to know if you understand what you're signing up for. The media attention will get worse. There will be more calls like the one you got today from people trying to use you to influence Sarah. And if this acquisition falls through, there will be investigations, lawsuits, congressional hearings. Marcus could end up in the middle of all of it. Tom thought about the little boy in the next room who had laughed with genuine joy while building blanket forts, who had hugged him goodnight and called him Uncle Tom without any awareness of his mother's corporate empire. Eleanor, Tom said finally, what does Marcus want? The older woman smiled. He wants to stay here with you and Jake. This is the happiest I've seen him in years. Then he stays, Tom said without hesitation. Whatever comes with that, we'll figure it out. Eleanor studied his face for a long moment. Sarah said you were special. I can see why. As she was leaving, Eleanor turned back to Tom one more time. There's something else you should know. Sarah hasn't just been staying away because of the business crisis. She's scared. Scared of what? Scared of what? Of how much she's come to care about you in just a few days. Of the possibility that she might have found something real with you and Jake, and that her responsibilities might force her to walk away from it. After Eleanor left, Tom sat in his quiet kitchen, trying to process everything he'd learned. Sarah wasn't just a wealthy CEO who had deceived him about her identity. She was a woman trapped between impossible choices, fighting to maintain her position in a hostile corporate world, while trying to be a good mother to her son. And somehow, in the span of a few days, both she and Marcus had become more important to him than his own safety and peace of mind. The question now was whether Sarah would be strong enough to fight her way back to them, or if the corporate world would ultimately claim both her and Marcus, leaving Tom and Jake with nothing but memories of the brief time when their little family had felt complete. 2 weeks later, Tom was beginning to think he might never see Sarah again. The media attention had died down somewhat, but Marcus still asked every night if his mother had called. She hadn't. According to the business news, the Yamamoto acquisition had fallen through, Mitchell Industries stock had plummeted, and there were rumors of a hostile takeover attempt. Marcus had stopped asking when he could go home. Instead, he'd quietly integrated himself into Tom and Jake's life with the adaptability of a child who'd learned not to get too attached to any one situation. He did his homework at the kitchen table, helped with dishes without being asked, and had nightmares that Tom learned to soothe with patient sitting and gentle reassurance. Jake, for his part, had embraced having a brother with the wholehearted enthusiasm of a lonely child, finally given a companion. The two boys had become inseparable, and Tom found himself wondering what would happen to Jake when Marcus inevitably had to leave. The thought of losing both Marcus and Sarah had become a constant ache in Tom's chest. On a Tuesday evening, while the boys were building yet another elaborate blanket fort in the living room, Tom heard a soft knock at the door. He looked through the peephole and nearly gasped. Sarah stood in the hallway looking nothing like the confident CEO he'd glimpsed 2 weeks ago, or the desperate woman who'd fled in a helicopter. She was wearing simple jeans and a sweater, her hair was loose around her shoulders, and she looked exhausted but somehow more peaceful than he'd ever seen her. Tom opened the door slowly, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Hi," Sarah said quietly. "Is it too late to ask if that offer of shelter is still good?" Before Tom could answer, Marcus's voice rang out from the living room. Mom, you're here!" The 8-year-old came flying around the corner and launched himself into his mother's arms with such force that she staggered backward. Sarah held him tightly, tears streaming down her face as she buried her nose in his hair. I missed you so much, sweetheart, she whispered. So much, and are you staying? Marcus asked, pulling back to search her face. Are you staying for real this time? Sarah looked over Marcus's head at Tom, her eyes full of uncertainty and hope. I'd like to. If Tom will have us. Jake appeared beside them, bouncing with excitement. Sarah, did you come back to live with us? Marcus said maybe you would, but I wasn't sure. Tom felt his throat tighten with emotion. Live with them. As if it was the most natural thing in the world. Why don't we sit down? Tom suggested, leading them into the living room where the blanket fort dominated most of the available space. Sarah, what happened? With the business, I mean. Sarah settled onto the couch with Marcus curled against her side, as if he was afraid she might disappear again if he let go. I resigned, she said simply. Tom stared at her in shock. You resigned? From your own company? It was never really mine, Sarah explained, running her fingers through Marcus's hair. After my husband died, the board let me run it because I was good at making them money. But they never really accepted me as the permanent CEO. When I left to think about what I really wanted, they used it as an excuse to replace me. But you built that company, Tom protested, remembering what Eleanor had told him. I helped grow it, yes. But Tom? Sitting in those boardrooms for the past 2 weeks, fighting for an acquisition I didn't even believe in. Missing Marcus, missing... She paused, her cheeks flushing. Missing you and Jake and this life we had for just a few days. I realized I was fighting for the wrong things. What will you do now? Tom asked gently. Sarah smiled, and it was the first genuinely happy expression he'd seen on her face since that Sunday morning when she'd made pancakes in his kitchen. I'm starting my own company. Something smaller, more focused. I've got enough money saved to live comfortably while I build it up. And more importantly, I can build it around the kind of life I want Marcus to have. What kind of life is that? Jake asked, with the innocent curiosity of childhood. The kind where I don't miss bedtime stories because of board meetings, Sarah said, ruffling his hair. The kind where we can have pancakes on Sunday morning and build blanket forts and go to the park without security guards. Marcus looked up at his mother with wonder. Really? No more business trips during school plays? No more fancy dinners where I have to wear a suit? Well, maybe a few fancy dinners, Sarah laughed. But only the fun kind. And never during school plays. Tom felt a dangerous hope blooming in his chest. Sarah, what are you really saying? She stood up, gently disentangling herself from Marcus, and walked over to where Tom was sitting. Her hands were shaking slightly as she reached for his. I'm saying that these past 2 weeks have been the worst of my life, not because I lost my position as CEO, but because I lost this. I lost the chance to wake up in a house full of laughter, to have someone who cares whether I made it home safely, to watch Marcus be friends with the most wonderful boy I've ever met. Jake beamed at the compliment, but Tom barely noticed. All his attention was focused on Sarah, on the vulnerability in her eyes and the hope in her voice. I'm saying, she continued, that if you're willing, I'd like to find a place nearby. Close enough that the boys can stay best friends. Close enough that maybe we can see where this goes. This? Tom asked, though his heart was already providing the answer. This feeling I have when I look at you, Sarah said softly. This sense that maybe I've found something I didn't even know I was looking for. A real partnership, a real family, a real life. Tom stood up, his hands still clasped in hers. Sarah, I need you to be sure. I can't have Marcus getting attached to the idea of us being a family if you're going to change your mind when things get complicated. I am sure, Sarah said firmly. Tom, I've spent the last 15 years building an empire, but you know what I realized? I'd rather build a life, and I can't imagine building it with anyone but you. Marcus and Jake had been listening to this conversation with the rapt attention that children brought to adult discussions that would affect their lives. Does this mean we're going to be brothers for real? Jake asked Marcus in a stage whisper. I think so, Marcus whispered back, grinning widely. Can we still have our fort? Jake wanted to know. Sarah laughed. We can have as many forts as you want, but maybe we should look for a house with a bigger living room. Our house? Tom asked, hardly daring to believe what he was hearing. If you want, Sarah said, moving closer to him. Tom, I know this is fast. I know we've only known each other for a few weeks, and most of that time I was hiding who I really was. But sometimes you just know, don't you? Tom thought about the feeling he'd had that very first night, watching Sarah make hot chocolate in his kitchen as if she belonged there. He thought about how right it had felt to have her and Marcus in his life. how complete their little family had seemed during those few precious days. "Yeah," he said, cupping her face in his hands. "Sometimes you just know." When he kissed her, it felt like coming home. It felt like the beginning of something that had been waiting to happen since the moment she'd knocked on his door in the rain. Marcus and Jake cheered, and when Tom and Sarah broke apart, they found themselves being tackled by two excited 8-year-olds. "So we're really going to be a family?" Marcus asked, looking between Tom and his mother. "We already are a family," Sarah said, looking around at the three most important people in her world. "We have been since that first night." Tom pulled all three of them into a group hug, marveling at how his quiet, predictable life had been turned upside down by a rainy night and a knock on the door. He'd thought he was just sheltering a woman and her son for one night. He'd had no idea he was welcoming home the missing pieces of his heart. 6 months later, as Tom walked into the kitchen of their new house and found Sarah making pancakes, while Jake and Marcus argued over who got to flip the next one, he reflected on how wrong he'd been about what constituted real wealth. Sarah had given up billions of dollars and a position of enormous power, but as she turned to smile at him over the chaos of their Sunday morning routine, Tom knew that both of them had gained something infinitely more valuable. They had found each other, and in doing so, had created the kind of home where love was the only currency that truly mattered.